If you follow us on Instagram or our YouTube channel, you know that we've got an unhealthy addiction for Nintendo handheld consoles. As always, we want to push the boundaries of what could be done with a handheld console. So this time we thought, why not install a DS Lite into a 2011 Jakks Pokédex console? We started by sourcing a broken DS Lite console and a beyond repair Jakks Pokédex console. As we're familiar how to strip down a Nintendo DS Lite console for repair, we first focused our attention on stripping down the Pokédex console down to its bare minimum. Our plan for this build was to salvage as much of the original console as possible. We wanted to retain and repair the original LCD screen for the Pokédex console and then add the DS Lite screen to the top half of the shell. At the bottom of the shell, where the white Pokeball is located, we plan to remove this and install an analog stick, and then add some buttons on the right hand side. On the rear, there will be 2 trigger buttons. The top will feature a power button, volume control, while the bottom features USB-C charging, start, select buttons, and would like to flash the ROM and add screen swapping capability. And of course, we'll be adding the R4 flash card to play all your favourite retro gaming consoles. Upon stripping down the original Pokédex shell, a few things crossed our mind. Firstly, how flimsy the shell is, as well as fitting the DS Lite motherboard into the shell. We knew that we had to glue the shell together to ensure that it was rigid and that it was long enough to fit the original DS Lite motherboard. This would involve ensuring that the shell was secured in its open position for all components to fit safely. Once the Pokédex console was open, we then set about seeing if we could repair the original electronics that were corroded from battery acid wear. We set about scrubbing and cleaning the original Pokédex PCB and removing all the corrosion, as well as soldering new tracks. After a lot of persistence and repair, the console was working again, however there were LCD issues. Even after thorough repair of the LCD screen, resitting it and soldering the terminals, there still seemed to be dead pixels appearing. We decided to keep the original LCD screen anyway, just to keep with the retro theme. Having just decided to keep the original LCD screen, we then focus our attention on trying to salvage the original internals for buttons and functionality with the console. With approximately 1/4 of an inch room within the console once sealed up, we knew that we had to do a lot of trimming to the original shell as well as the Nintendo DS Lite motherboard. We first went about trimming the backplate of the rear console as well as the battery compartment to allow more room for the components to fit. We then went about machining a section in the middle of the shell, which hindered the placement of the DS Lite motherboard. Having ensured that the internals of the shell was machined out enough, we then focused our attention on installing the analog stick and drilling out holes for the A and B buttons. The bottom of the shell was drilled out for start, select and screen swapper capability buttons, as well as USB-C charging. And the rear of the shell would house the trigger buttons. We then went about fabricating a small circuit which would hold the A and B buttons. In this case, we used soft touch tactile buttons. As we were using a single LCD screen for this build, we decided to flash the firmware. This would enable screen swapping capability. As previously stated, we were using a DS Lite motherboard for this build, so to ensure that it fit, we stripped it down to its bare minimum and removed all unnecessary components. As the console was long in design, we decided to use a ribbon extender cable. As suspected, a lot of the original internals were damaged beyond repair, so we went about installing the analog stick and tactile buttons for the start, select, screen swapping capability, and A and B buttons, and pre-wiring them to be connected to the console. Obviously, the wiring would have to be tidied up in the future, However, we could start to see the console coming together and picturing the final product. As the Pokédex console was too compact to fit the original DS Lite motherboard, we felt that it was better to have it extended long ways to ensure all the components fit and the console was functional. With the basic outline coming to shape, we then turned our attention on soldering the trigger buttons, volume control, and touchscreen. With limited space within the console, we decided to mount the battery to the rear of the shell and solder the R4 flash card directly to the DS Lite motherboard. We then went about cutting out a notch in the side of the shell to allow access to the micro SD card to add more ROMs to the console. After a quick test and happy with the aesthetics of the console, we then went about gluing the console together. This was a necessity as most of the screw mounts were cut to ensure that the DS Lite motherboard fit within the original shell. Well, after a couple of weeks of building and planning, we finally finished our Pokédex Unova DS Lite console. We're extremely pleased on how the end product turned out. We're yet to see another Pokédex Unova console being created. The build was quite challenging at times due to the space limitations. However, we feel we managed to keep all the original aesthetics that were in play. As previously discussed, the console features the original backlit screen from a Nintendo DS Lite, as well as screen swapping capabilities, so you can play all your favourite DS games. With the R4 flash card installed into the console, you're now capable of playing all your favourite original Game Boy, Game Boy Color, Game Boy Advance, Nintendo DS, PC Engine, Sega Master System, Sega Mega Drive, and Atari games. The console also features tactile power button, volume slider, USB-C charging, analog stick, A and B, and trigger buttons mounted to the rear of the console. On the right-hand side of the console, there's also access to the micro SD cards, so you can always add more of your favourite retro games. And although the original LCD screen does have issues, we were able to retain it, and it is functioning. It is able to be turned on and off with a power button on the rear of the shell. Although this was one of the more challenging builds, we were quite pleased of the overall finish of the product. Some of the cons with this build were that the original LCD screen did have issues, and it is quite cumbersome using just an analog stick to control the console. The internals of the shell were very tight, and we could only build the console with its extended screen. There are also no X and Y buttons. However, this orientation can be changed in the flashcard setup. We also couldn't fit the original DS Lite and Game Boy Advance cartridge slots and had to go with the R4 card soldered directly to the console. Well, the pros of this console speak for themselves. If you're a handheld or Pokemon lover, then you're in heaven. The console features modern touches such as USB-C charging, rechargeable battery, backlit screen, and flash firmware for screen swapping capability, and a flash card for playing all your favourite retro console games. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and check out all our other crazy creations. Take care.